ever been in a new city or place and somehow somebody stops to ask you for directions? I know this happened to me. I mean, you want to help, but you're just as clueless as they are. Or maybe you're a parent and you attempted to help your son or daughter with their math homework. But when they showed you what they're supposed to do and what they're learning and how they're solving it, it all looks like a foreign language to you. You want to help, but you don't know how. And imagine that's just first grade math. That's what my life is like. Or maybe you found yourself in this kind of situation at work. You were given an assignment, and while you weren't totally clear on what you were supposed to be doing, you thought you'd be able to figure it out as you went along. And suddenly, you're days away from the deadline and still clueless as to what you're supposed to be doing. And it feels too late to say anything now or to ask for help. You feel paralyzed about where to go from here. We all know this feeling, right? The feeling of wanting to do something, but not being sure how to do it. For the past few weeks, we've been talking about injustice and how we all just wish somebody, somewhere would do something. And when it comes to injustice, we can relate to that helpless feeling. Some injustice is so big that it makes us feel helpless. We want to do something, we want to help, we want to be a part of the solution, but it all feels like too much. In this series, we've defined justice as something that's right, fair, or equal. And injustice is the opposite of those things. So when we talk about injustice, we're talking about the things in our world that are not right, that are unfair, that are unequal. Victims of human trafficking, that's injustice. Families in poverty, that's injustice. Schools go online during a pandemic, but students don't have the tools, resources, or internet access they need to keep up, that's injustice. Women not being paid the same as men for the same job, injustice. People being treated differently because of their race or ethnicity, that's injustice. We could add all kinds of things on this list. When we look around, it doesn't take long to see that injustice is everywhere. And because injustice is so pervasive in our world, it can be easy to feel frozen and helpless. We see the need, we know something should be done, we just don't know what. But like we said last week, God is calling each of us to embrace a big idea. You are somebody who could do something. Now, depending on your wiring or personality, you may hear that statement and get excited, challenged, or even inspired. You're ready to go to work. For you, the problem isn't getting you to see what needs to be done. Instead, you're challenged by the scope and size of what needs to be done. Or maybe you're still feeling paralyzed and helpless, like a parent trying to learn a new way of doing math. And you feel that way because you realize how emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually exhausting it is to fight injustice. As much as we're talking and praying about injustice, the reality is that to you, it truly feels like one of those problems that can't be solved. Maybe you're thinking, injustice has always happened, and it's still happening, so is there really any hope of changing it? Maybe you're wondering how you, just one person, can make a meaningful difference in some huge problems like racism, human trafficking, sexism, poverty, and more. Or maybe you're so tired of talking about it and trying to explain it to people that you wonder if it's even worth trying anymore. Will people ever care as much as you do? Or maybe you've experienced injustice for so long that you wonder if saying anything or doing anything is really going to make a difference. It hasn't so far, so why would it now? Every one of those responses makes sense. Because standing up and doing something isn't easy. It's something that feels like somebody bigger or stronger or more influential should be doing. It feels like something somebody needs to be doing something about, right? Well, you are somebody. Today, we're going to look at a letter from the New Testament written by a man named James. James had an interesting backstory because not only was he a follower of Jesus, he was also Jesus' half-brother. So initially, James had little interest in following his brother and believing he's the Son of God, which, if you have a brother, you get. But then Jesus was crucified and came back to life. That was enough to convince James that Jesus is who he said he is. Later, James wrote a letter to other followers of Jesus, people who were experiencing extreme injustice for their beliefs. In fact, deciding to follow Jesus in the first century was almost a guarantee you'd be treated unfairly and persecuted for your faith. So, a decision to follow Jesus was also a decision to experience mistreatment as a result. And in light of all of this, James wrote this. Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, "Goodbye and have a good day. Stay warm and eat well." But then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? This message couldn't be simpler. James was telling us that if we see someone who needs help and we essentially respond by saying, "Good luck," that's not helpful. But we're all tempted to do this, right? When faced with the hugeness of a problem that we don't know how to solve, we often just settle for saying something and doing nothing. When we see something unjust happening in our town, we think about how bad it is, but sometimes that's where our involvement ends. When we see someone we know struggling to have their needs met, we might say we'll pray for them, and we probably do, but of course, we don't want to get in their business, so it stops there. We don't do much else. When we see racial injustice happening in our country, we might post about it on social media feeds, but then we move on. We can all relate to the temptation to limit our involvement or to simply pray about something that feels unjust. Yes, praying is powerful. Thinking about these issues matters. But if our doing something stops there, we've missed some of what it means to follow Jesus. You see, following somebody means you do the kind of things that they would do. You walk in their footsteps. You don't just support the work they do, you replicate it. And Jesus was always doing something about injustice. Maybe you've heard about how Jesus spoke up for the poor, cared for the sick, hung out with people who were outcast, and confronted leaders who were treating people unfairly. Did Jesus offer kind words and prayers? Absolutely. But he didn't stop there. He also offered his actions. He lived in a way that showed the world what it's like to value people. And as his followers, we can do the same. James reiterated this idea when he wrote this. In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. James was saying that our faith and our actions are connected. If we say we have faith, but that faith doesn't motivate us to do something, then something about our faith is broken. And here's why that's a big deal. Living a life of faith is about becoming more like Jesus. And when it came to injustice, Jesus was always doing something. Always. And when we make that shift to allow our prayers and words to turn into action, we're becoming more like the person we're praying to. We're becoming more like Jesus. The things that you know aren't right, the injustices that motivate you to act, those things that hurt you and the people you love, those things are wrongs in the world that God wants to see made right. And he wants you to be the somebody to do something about it. So, when it comes to injustice, never stop doing something. It may feel overwhelming, like our little actions won't have any effect on such giant problems, but every bit of movement matters because change happens one step at a time. Now, some of you get this because you've been doing something about injustice for a long time. You've been speaking up for people, showing up to help, and working. But you also know this work is exhausting. Sometimes it feels like you're not making a difference. Well, if that's you, let's hear from somebody else who met Jesus, who hung out with his followers, and who spoke to people facing huge injustice. Here's what the Apostle Paul said in a letter to the early church in Galatia. So let's not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. Therefore, whenever we have the opportunity, we should do good to everyone. In other words, don't give up. Don't give in when the good work gets hard. Instead, keep going, keep working, keep fighting. See, as difficult as it might be to believe that what we're doing is making a difference, all we have to do is look into the past, look into our shared history, and see that change has happened and is continuing to happen. There is movement. And that's because people just like you never tired of doing good. They didn't give up. Even if they personally didn't get to see the harvest they worked for, the things they did paved a way for you and me. It may feel impossible, but little by little, you can change the world. How? Like James said, do something. And like Paul said, keep doing something. So here are some ways to keep doing something about injustice. First, use your voice. Speak up. Say something in the moment. Say something on social media. Say something to a person in power or with influence who may be able to make things happen more quickly. Use the voice you have to speak up and speak out for those who need it. And then keep saying something until it does. Use your influence. All of us have influence in some way or another. Use your influence to talk about injustice with the people in your circle. Whether it's family, friends, coworkers, or neighbors, consider rallying people together, pulling resources together to do something as a family or neighborhood or organization to pack more influence. Use your talent. Get creative about the ways you can use the talent God has given you to do something for others. Maybe get your book club to read a book about injustice. Maybe organize a fundraiser with your tennis league. Maybe your house can be a place for kids who don't have a parent at home to come to after school and get help with homework. Get creative about what you bring to the table and then use it. Use your life. We're not talking about just one service project or signing up to volunteer a few times. Part of following Jesus is making a commitment to do something and keep doing something. It's making the lifelong commitment to be in the work of promoting justice. As we wrap up the series, imagine this. What if the church actually did this? Not just your local church, but the church, the entire community of people who follow Jesus. How might the people around us see God differently if Christians were known for choosing to see people the way God sees them and then treat them as He would? It can happen, but only if we do something.